Welcome back, everybody. It's been a little bit. Here I'm gonna start off real quick with some time lapses of the printing of the base of the Alien versus Predator. You can see that I'm already starting to prime everything in nice black from Vallejo. All the pieces were printed on my K1 Max. All the top pieces of the egg were resin printed, of course, while the bottom was FDM printed. Since we're going for a monochromatic actual display today, I'm making sure to keep everything as dark and black and saturated as possible. You're gonna see me go over with at least 2 to 3 coats of primer on every single piece, including these tentacles that have nice thin grooves. And here we're gonna start with the Predator. Starting off with all the dark parts, making sure we get full coverage in every nook and cranny and little piece. You're gonna see me struggle and take off the fan cap to make sure I can actually spread out the primer evenly. Unfortunately, I get about halfway through before the actual needle itself starts to clog because it starts to dry out a little too fast for me. As you can see there, my lovely little dirty rag that I use to clean everything up to keep everything flowing. I did thin it out a little extra. That's why you can see it has like a little white shine to it. But unfortunately, that didn't really help with the drying of the needle tip and just added more and more layers. I ended up having to use about 5 layers to get full coverage of everything. But it did level out pretty evenly all the way across the model. And I cannot stress enough how a Lazy Susan is a godsend in this moment when it comes to actually cleaning up all of the pieces and making sure I get every single angle while everything's wet. I kept the feet and hands apart because obviously they are going to be the ones touching the other model and the base itself, so I made sure to prime those separately, as well as the tentacles that would go on the back of the alien. And here's the alien. It barely fits in my actual spray booth itself. I had to put it together because this would make it a lot easier for me in terms of planning out where I wanted the lights to hit, what edges I wanted to highlight, and making sure that everything was nice and evenly coated. It did struggle in there. As you can see, it's resting up against the side of my airbrush booth, but you know, the airbrush booth is a bit essential at this point when I'm spraying so much pigment and paint all the way across. I had to cut the tail in half to actually fit it on my printer, then welded it together with resin in the middle. And here it is being painted up with the exact same Vallejo black primer that everything else is being covered with. It did take a few extra coats because of the ridges. Here's a zoom in on the left and a more complete view on the right of the actual paint up itself. I did have to record this vertically because it was just a massive print. Starting off with a dark, colder gray, I'm dry brushing every little nook and cranny I can get my hands on, trying to leave the contrast of the black in between to add a little more detail to the model itself. The cold gray basically is the first layer of 3 that will be creating the contrast that we're looking for in this monochrome video. I did try to push up as close as possible so you could see how the model itself just starts to take shape as I start adding in this dark gold gray. And this is not in any particular direction. I'm just making sure I get full coverage enough to create the illusion of contrast that it's going to have. Later on, I'll go ahead and take aim from a higher vantage point with the colder, lighter grays, and you'll see that it starts to shape up a sort of light shape that would be coming in from the top towards their faces, which I consider to be the main focal point. But in this stage, I'm just making sure that I get full coverage and everything gets a nice even bit of attention and love, including the base itself. This is all a dry brush with a nice thick round brush. It is very, very, very soft to make sure I can pick up as much pigment as possible. It is a semi-wet dry brush, but you'll see that it definitely helps to cover a lot quicker if I do it this way. You'll definitely start seeing all the little details that were crafted into these models by 3dWicked to start showing up in a more pronounced way. I'm focusing more on the tail because unfortunately, since the ridge is so high, it's gonna be really difficult to make sure I get paint up into those spots to make sure that everything kind of blends together and it doesn't look like I splotched out a little section and splotched another section. I want everything to kind of have a same even flat tone. Again, this is not to create depth. This is at this point just to create contrast. Giving a lot of love to the egg as well because, I mean, he is standing on it, so you want to make sure it looks very, very prominent. Here I've switched to a much thinner brush and I've already gone up one step in the color, trying to pick out very selective parts. I did switch back because I thought it was going to be a lot more powerful, but when I noticed that the difference between this gray, which is a dark gray, and the medium gray that I'm using right now is not as stark, I figured as long as I keep it centralized with a big brush, I could still cover a lot of area in a lot of quicker time. It's a subtle difference, but this subtle difference definitely starts showing up a lot later. And if you notice, I'm only hitting the top parts. I'm avoiding anything that might be in shadow or anything that might be below or under or would be considered something that you would not see if you were standing from up top where the light would be hitting. I am semi-highlighting certain small sections to make sure that it does have enough contrast, but just keeping it all the heavy strokes and all the heavy lifting, if you would, of the color to be in the higher places, the top facing places, anything that I would think the light would touch. Trying to sneak into those little nooks and crannies that would still get a little bit of light as well. Like I said, I'm trying to imagine a spotlight hitting them right in the face, and then you're gonna have a light bounce that would come down into all the little spaces in between their legs and between the rib cages, towards the little armpit area, but just it would be a lot lighter. A lighter of a touch, a lighter of a pigment load as well. So now I switched to the shorter brush. This is again a nice, really bright gray. It is a close to white, and I'm just picking out all the little things that I really want to give detail to. The tops of the pecs, the skulls in his chest, the dreads that he's got coming out of his head, a bit of his mask, of course the gauntlets itself. It'll be the top of his helmet as well, fingers, the webbing in between. We're gonna work our way over to the top of the boots, all the cod pieces, and trying to really like pull out all the little details that I really wanted them to shine. This is where we're really adding depth to this. And if you notice, I'm trying to avoid all the hidden parts, if you would, undersides and stuff like that. Anything under his neck as well. the more I add, the more you could see that the definition of what a black and white painting would almost be. And I'm definitely only pulling from the top to the bottom, trying to do a kind of cross, if you would, letting the other colors do a lot of the heavy lifting. These are, again, semi-wet dry brushing, just trying to pick up a lot of the details, but kind of give it almost a streaky look. Of course, if you ever overload it, you can always go back, add a little black, maybe a black wash into the little crevices and nooks and crannies, and you can actually take out a lot of the paint itself by just adding a black wash, adding in an extra layer of depth. Again, avoiding smaller areas that would be in a lot of shadow. Trying to give a lot of love to the armor pieces, the foot, the metal, anything has intricate designs. Of course, the base by the foot also needs to get a lot of the ribbing to show up. See, now you can see the actual veins of the top of the egg because we've added this next step. The knuckles of the feet, well, of course, also show up. That creepy little face hugger. Trying to avoid also the softer parts, leaving those to the end because I know that I'm gonna have to slow down and be a lot more delicate with them. As you see, the more I add, the more it starts to give a nice graphic design, almost Frank Miller kind of look to it. Deep inky blacks, nice bright whites. I'm sure that a lot of people are asking if I did the bottom egg of the egg in FDM, wouldn't you see ridges? Of course you could see them, but because they were semi-sanded and filled, they actually add a little more depth to the actual like veins and ringing of the actual egg itself. You could see them very clearly there by my forearm, but because of that, it doesn't really make it look terrible. It doesn't make it look bad either. Nobody would really know unless you told them. And you guys know, obviously, because you saw it being printed. But moving on, you can see that I'm actually starting to hit up the nicer, more delicate parts, if you would, of the alien itself, popping out the ridges, making sure that roundness of the back of the head is actually prominent. Highlighting those tentacles and all the little tubes and ridges and ribs and pieces of bony kind of parts to the actual tail itself. I am trying to avoid the middle parts that have the lighter gray or the darker grays as well, because those are supposed to add the depth along with the black. So if I put a little white in there, it's gonna look a lot flatter, if you would. And now you could really see the texture at the tip of the tail. And of course, right at the center of the body, you can see a lot more of the ringing and ridges around the body itself. So as we come to the end, you can see that I'm doing a lot of the cross dry brushing against the grain of a lot of the ribs, so I could pick up the ribs and not the interior. Because if I pulled down on that leg, then you would only get a swash of white instead of actually just highlighting all the little ridges and ribs. So don't only bring it from top down, try and go against the grain to pick up the ridges as well. Doing a few final spins, making sure to pick up anything that might be left over. And we're about ready to get to our final shots. If you like this new way of recording, I hope you leave a comment, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And here are our final shots. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.